How many people get money from the Gates Foundation in your Well, one of the challenges is in public health.
There was one other question.
Oh, yeah. Anybody from the Gates Foundation here?
I'm checking.
No, it happens.
Gates Foundation or AGRA or any of those associates? Okay.
So it's just one comment. So it's true that maybe nobody here gets money, but there's a lot of groups in DC who are involved in work in Africa who are getting money from the Gates Foundation. There's a huge investment in the Gates Foundation in public media. If you've ever listened to NPR, it's not just ABM that's being advertised on NPR. And the Berkeley School of Journalism has been getting money from the Gates Foundation to help represent agricultural development in Africa. So the Gates Foundation, as you'll hear, is investing in lots of ways to influence our thinking about Africa.
I'm Phil Bariano, and I am with the AGRA Project, as is Bill Ball. We're located up in Seattle, and we're a group of people who had connections to Africa, GMO, to agriculture, et cetera, who felt that we had a particular responsibility as being from the hometown, the Gates Foundation's hometown, from a town which gives Gates people lots of goodies, like closing off 6 public streets so they could build a new campus, et cetera, that we had a responsibility, that we had a responsibility to try to do something, to work with our African partners on these issues. And we've been in existence for about 4 years now. We are a project of a 10-year-old organization in Seattle called the Community Alliance for Global Justice. I'm going to talk first. Marcia is going to talk next. Marcia was introduced to you from PAN, Pesticide Action Network, and she's been very much involved, located here in the Bay Area, but very much involved in these issues. And then Bill will talk. We're going to try and hold our talks down to a relatively short period of time to maximize the amount of time for discussion and dialogue. I do want to mention in advance the reason I have my cell phone. My son is undergoing a medical procedure this morning. It's informed that it's over, and I hope you will understand if the phone. Totally. Thank you so much. It's my responsibility to go through what is literally a huge amount of introductory material, and I'm going to really just do highlights to orient you to what's going on. And it's very nice that quite a large number of you indicated that you are aware of what the Gates Foundation is doing in Africa. And more detail can certainly come out in the Q&A. I'll wait. The Gates Foundation is the largest private charitable operation in the world, and it joined in 2006 with the Rockefeller Foundation in creating something called the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, known as AGRA. That's why we're called AGRA Watch. And the purpose was to tackle hunger in Africa by working to achieve food secure, prosperous Africa through the promotion of rapid, sustainable agricultural growth based on smallholder farmers. AGRA, according to the Gates Foundation, is, quote, an African-based and African-led effort to develop a thriving agricultural sector in sub-Saharan Africa. Yet the fact is that large numbers of African farmers and rural community groups in Africa are raising critical concerns about the Foundation's work in Africa and its reliance on high-cost inputs and new technologies. High-tech industrial ag is what the Gates Foundation is pushing on Africa. These groups in Africa have also raised concerns about the transparency and lack of opportunities for participation. The Gates Foundation picks the NGOs it's going to participate with in conferences and so forth in these processes of decision-making for African agriculture. So, The original Green Revolution I'm not going to talk about very much. It did, in fact, increase the production of food. It did not, in general, reduce world food hunger for a variety of reasons, and it had a variety of negative social and economic consequences, in particular, the driving out of small landholders and consolidation of village farms and so forth, so they could use the mechanization and the high-tech input. Despite these failures, Bill Gates, in a speech to the 2009 World Food Price Symposium, which was held in Iowa, proclaimed the next green revolution must be guided by smallholder farmers. I want to emphasize that because, of course, it's not. It's guided by Bill Gates, who is a highly educated, non-African man who knows nothing about agriculture. Okay? Yes, he hires people. He hires people who, as we'll talk about, generally don't cross him. Okay? Because that's the nature of the game. Okay? At any rate, Gates went on to say that guided by smallholder farmers, adapted to local circumstances, which we will show it is not, and sustainable, which we will show it is not, for the economy and the environment, which it is not. So when we take a closer look at this, we will see why each one of these little tiny phrases is in fact not true. I don't have the time now to do that. It will come out in the discussions and in the Q&A, okay? But I do want to say that one of the values about doing this kind of work after you get started is that sometimes you're lucky and you develop contacts who will leak things to you. And we had a document leaked to us a number of years ago, about 2 years ago, in which the Gates Foundation acknowledges that one of the impacts of their activities in Africa will be what they euphemistically call land mobility. Land mobility is really people mobility. It is the leaving of the land by people and going into the cities. In other words, smallholders who, for whatever reason, can't stay on their farms and move to the cities. Like Nairobi needs more poor homeless people, right? And the rationale that the Gates Foundation apparently uses to justify this is that the cities are the center of modernity. And this will help Kenya and these other countries become more modern. I just mentioned that to put a little context on it. While the Gates Foundation works hard to separate itself from AGRA and to make AGRA look as if it is African-led, it's actually a kind of shell game. And they move things back and forth, they move projects back and forth, they fund. The decisions are really made by 2 or 3 people, and the like. Again, we can give more details if you're interested. One of the things I want to say is that we have a bunch of these here and downstairs. These are pamphlets about AgriWatch, and there is a link, the URL link to our website. We've put up already lots of materials that will give in-depth discussions of a number of the points that come out here. But we're just putting up 2 packets of materials that I think you will find particularly useful. One is on the nature of agroecology, what Marcia began to introduce. And some of the reports which Marcia had on that slide are included in the packet that we have put together and the like. So you can get them all there together. Secondly is a packet dealing with the most recent activities of the Gates Foundation and AGRA, which is, I think, really interesting material for you to see and to see it all pulled together, to see the kinds of things that they are doing. Finally, I would suggest, and if I have time, I'll discuss it a little bit. On the Gates Foundation's website itself is their newly proclaimed plan for the future for African agriculture, and it's a little bit frightening. You might also want to check that out, okay? We did, and again, you can find it on our website, particularly in an article that's in the Third World Resurgence magazine that we did, a diagram, which we can't unfortunately reproduce here, which shows the incredible links of the Foundation and AGRA to Monsanto, just as an example. Although, in addition to the fact, of course, of the Foundation owning Monsanto stock, investments, it funds numerous groups that are also funded or working with Monsanto. So the upshot is that the foundation, one of its major partners is a corporation called AGRA. Most of us have never heard of it before this. AGRA is the world's largest fertilizer corporation based in Norway. And we're talking here about agricultural systems that push fertilizers, pesticides, high-tech genetically engineered seeds, and the rest on farmers, monocultures, all of the kinds of things that we have all from our various activities and realms of life have learned are very problematic, each one of them, okay? In addition, of course, the personnel in the Gates Foundation represents a kind of revolving door between Monsanto and the government and the like. And one example, Rajiv Shah, who used to head up programs in the foundation, told me, of course, they have, when I met him in his office, they have no relationship to AGRA, but of course, right next door at that time was the office of the guy who was heading up AGRA, but they have no relationship, of course. Rajiv Shah was, at that time, the director of the Gates Foundation's Agricultural Development Program. He was then drafted into a U.S. Department of Agriculture policy position and stayed there hardly a few weeks until, actually several months, until Obama made him the head of USAID. He's a medical doctor who has spent time in Africa, but as far as I know, knows very little about agriculture or about development aid. When we track the funds from the Gates Foundation through AGRA, it becomes clear that the new green revolution in Africa is not being guided by local small farmers. Instead, the Gates Foundation granting process is guided by scientists, non-governmental organizations, and corporations that are all aligned under the ideology that favors this high-tech industrial ag. So just to give you one example that I know well, a personal one. So when I was talking to Rajiv Shah and others in the office, I've been privileged to be involved, for example, in the negotiations of the Cartagena Protocol on biotechnology. So, you know, I said there are lots of scientists, African scientists, who are very much involved in the policy end as well, and who are very troubled about what you guys are talking about doing. And they said, oh, could you give us the names and the contact information of these people? And I said, well, what I'll do is contact them, and if they agree, I'll be happy to give it to you. So I contacted 3 of the continent's leading people. I mean, if you know this field, you will know 1, 2, or all 3 of these names. And they all agreed. One from Ethiopia, one from Egypt, one from Nigeria. They all agreed, and I passed on all of the information, postal addresses, fax numbers, the whole bit. Gates people never contacted one of them, ever. Okay? They play and manipulate you. Phil, I want to be sympathetic to you. Oh, tell us about your contacts and blah, blah, blah. They want to be able, hopefully I'll go around and tell people, oh, they're going to contact me and so forth. They don't do it. They don't. A recent report by ActionAid concluded that the AGRA concept, programs, and potential impacts are not adequately understood within civil society and social movements, including in numerous national organizations of the state and farmers. This is primarily due to the selective and poor information and communication on AGRA by its proponents. Very carefully managed program of who they work with, what they put out, and everything. So Bill Gates is on vacation with his eldest kid visiting game reserves in Tanzania and happens to have a meeting with the president of Tanzania to talk about Tanzanian agriculture. Just, you know, on his vacation, he says to the kid, hey, why don't we go stop at the presidential palace? You don't mind if Daddy has a little talk about agriculture, do you? You go up and play or something like that. This is the way it goes. Okay, I just want to cover.
So about 5 minutes?
Yeah. what they're trying to do is to have a paradigm shift in agriculture in Africa. That's to say, instead of being village-based, instead of being cooperative where seeds are, as you know, exchanged and stuff like that, that it's much more on the model in Iowa or in Kansas and so forth, okay? Where ag extension agents, which many of the African governments have, get trained in the new, modern ways of doing things and go out and serve as the agents to push this kind of program. We don't know very much. I mean, this is, I'm sure, come out and many of you understand this. We don't know very much about what the long-term impacts of a lot of particularly GMOs are. We certainly know and have information about what high-tech agriculture does to soil health and things like that. But given the fact that something like 80 or 90% of soil microbes have hardly ever been identified, no less is their processes understood, the biological processes, we don't know what the effects of planting something where these microbes are continuously 24/7 exposed to genetically engineered elements in the crops and stuff like that. No less we don't know it in Kansas, we certainly don't know it in Ethiopia. All right? The idea, by the way, which the highest officials of the U.S. government during these negotiations seriously maintain that if we assess a GMO for domestic use and it was okay, then the Africans, the Kenyans, and the Ethiopians and everything should say it was okay also. And I remember saying, it was in a conference before one of these international meetings, look, I'm no biologist, but isn't the ecology in Kenya going to be a little different from the ecology in Kansas? How can you say that the risk analysis is the same? So we're talking here about a whole cluster of things. The failure, although it's held forth as being scientific, the failure to do real inquiry that would be necessary, the failure to truly understand that the practices which have grown up in rural and indigenous communities have great value. Marcia's going to talk much more about this, and the like. Let me just mention one or two other things. Again, there's a huge amount of material out there. When you're Bill Gates, you get invited to Davos. I've never been invited to Davos. I like Switzerland, I like Swiss cheese, I like chocolate, but they've never invited me. At the World Economic Forum in Davos recently, the Gates Foundation, partnered with Big Agribusiness, rolled out 3 reports on market-based solutions to global hunger. Not village-based, not co-op-based, not communitarian solutions, but market-based solutions. All of them present the problem of food insecurity as an exciting business opportunity. They actually do calculations of hungry people and refer to them as this is the size of the business, the potential market, the business opportunity to sell crop to Ethiopians. To encourage the private sector to target the billions of hungry and poor, the base of the pyramid, BOP, it's called, B-O-P, the base of the pyramid. That's all the huddled masses, you know. It's one of the largest remaining untapped markets. Remember, these corporations have pretty well infiltrated all of the niches in Australia, in the developed world. Now they want to expand their markets, the logic of capitalism. They have to go bopping, okay? These 3 reports, which you can again find online, Realizing a New Vision for Agriculture, sponsored by Archer-Daniels Midlands, Cargill, Coca-Cola, DuPont, Kraft, etc., etc. 2, the Business Alliance Against Chronic Hunger, only 2 pages long, an initiative of Unilever, General Mills, Nike, TechnoServe, which is one of their grantees that is used as an entry point into Africa. Rockefeller Foundation. 3rd, The Next Billions, Business Strategies to Enhance Food Value Chains and Empower the Poor. You're entering into a world of Orwellian talk when you read their stuff, when you meet with them, when the words they use. dead. You have to understand that these words are understood and used differently by them, and that pacification, if I can use a strong word since they tried to pacify me, pacification is one of their primary communication strategies. So I urge you to go to their website for the new agricultural plan. Just one other thing I'm going to mention. There are lots and lots of organizations that are involved in this. If you do go and find our little diagram of who they're funding in Africa and how it relates to Monsanto, okay? They're creating more organizations. And I asked a new one is called AGRA, A-G in caps, R-E-E in small letters. Why? Maybe Marcia knows the answer. Why another organization? And I have finally, and I'll tell you a little bit about it because it's frightening. I think that they feel like the more organizations there are there, the more they can do this shell game that I referred to, of moving and shifting things around. And so you're talking to the people in AGRA and they say, oh no, we're not doing that. Maybe AGRA is doing that. You would AGRA and they say, no, but I think the Gates Foundation might be doing this. For example, when you ask them if they patent anything, this is the kind of response you get. So AGRA is a new initiative funded by the world's largest foundations. Gates, Walton, Ford, Kellogg, Hewitt Foundation, blah, blah, blah. Walton is, of course, the Walmart family, Rockefeller and the like. AGRI will fund agricultural research and analysis that will consider the needs of rural economies and the environment, as well as energy and health issues. I mean, why not deal with all of it, right? Food isn't enough. Let's have health. Let's throw in energy. We will, rule the world. As the world population surges by 38% over the next 4 decades, in the face of a limited amount of easily accessible arable land, increasing pressures on freshwater quality and availability, and accelerating environmental degradation. These are all elements that they push. Population growth, limited agricultural land, water issues, climate change, every one of these things, which become sort of scare words, because we good people are all afraid of the lack of water and inferior water quality that we know is happening, climate change that we know is happening. They are pushing buttons by using these words and suggesting that they are going to put their shoulder to the wheel to help solve them. AGRI will convene a diverse set of stakeholders, but of course they'll pick the stakeholders, including conventional and organic farmers, ranchers, nutritionists, energy experts, environmentalists, financiers, international aid veterans, and public health specialists. But the question is, which environmentalists, which energy experts, which nutritionists, and the like? But the basic bottom line is that the rich will help us sort out our problems. I'm happy to later on contribute to further discussion, and I appreciate the fact that my presentation has probably taken up a bit more than 1/3 of the time that we are, but my colleagues graciously understood that. I could give you guys some of the benefits of the research we have, and we want to hear later on the benefits of your experience on this thing. I turn it over to Marcia.
I feel like this session is kind of the horror show part of the conference. Bad news after bad news. I'm going to pass out, since I don't have a projector at the moment. You'll never be able to see it on my computer. This handout about what our government is doing with our taxpayer dollars. So the topic of my role here. So you've heard from Phil about philanthrocapitalism and what the Gates Foundation is doing. So what I'm going to talk about is what our government is doing together with Gates and Monsanto. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, which is working hand in glove. You might all maybe need to share. Perhaps if you could sit next to someone, you could pass an extra one back. raise your hand if you need one. Thanks so much for sharing. I thought this would all be up on screen. So as Phil was talking about Rajiv Shah, what we've seen over the past, well, many years, but unfortunately this trend of the revolving door has really continued under the Obama administration. So Rajiv Shah is one example, somebody who came with a strong techno kind of solution from the Gates Foundation to head up USAID. He was briefly heading up our food, that new little institution that we set up around food and agriculture. What is it? Well, I was thinking there's some agency that he was, that now Roger Beachy is heading. The National Institute for Food and Agriculture. Right. So here's another little revolving door story. Roger Beachy comes from Monsanto's nonprofit research wing, the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center. And sometimes the U.S. government will talk about it as if it's just this wonderful Danforth Plant Science Research Center. It has nothing to do with Monsanto. But you go on their website and you see all their board members are, from Monsanto. It was founded by Monsanto. The campus was funded by Monsanto. So it's basically their kind of greenwashed research arm, the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center. So Roger Beachy was heading up that. Then he was tapped by Obama to head up our National Institute for Food and Agriculture, which when this was initially the idea for this came out of the Farm Bill, the 2008 Farm Bill. Many of us were very excited because we've been talking about, well, we need to get out of these silos of the Department of Agriculture, which is very export-oriented and profit-oriented for corporations. We need some kind of an institute, like other countries have that integrate food and agriculture. So, all right, we'll have the NIFA, we'll have like we have a National Institute for Health, we'll have one for food and agriculture. That's what we were asking for. But then they went and put this guy from Monsanto in charge of it. So that wasn't too good. First, Rajiv Shah was in charge of it, and they moved him to USAID to head up our foreign aid, and moved the Monsanto guy, Roger Beachy, in. So that was one of a couple disappointing appointments. Michael Taylor, many of you have heard of. He's rotated back in and out of Monsanto and the Food and Drug Administration and is now our food czar.
Food safety czar.
Oh, food safety czar, yeah. The guy who brought us, pushed through bovine growth hormone because he had come from Monsanto and was at FDA when we were developing our policy around bovine growth hormone. It turns out that's okay to do. It's a good thing. He's also the guy who came up with the concept of substantial equivalence for GMOs, which is really this ironic, kind of hypocritical concept.
Michael Taylor did? Michael
Yeah.
Taylor came up with it substantially?
Right. Well,
There are seats up here. Oh, okay.
Were you going to correct that? Well, he pushed it. I'm not sure if he was the one who coined the term.
But he amplified it.
But yeah, he amplified it and made it real, saying, all right, and this concept is just that GMOs are substantially equivalent to non-GMOs. They have no nutritional differences. They're really basically the same thing. Therefore, we don't need labeling. That's one of the big problems we're having with trying to get a label through. But it turns out they're different enough that we need to patent them and charge all kinds of technology fees and, and have intellectual property around. So they're a little different in that way. But for all of you out there, they're not any different. Just different for us, so we get more money. So that's Michael Taylor. And then a couple years ago, or was it last year? Islam Siddiqui. He was the vice president for policy at CropLife America, which is the Association for Pesticide and Biotech Companies. There's a CropLife International, there's a CropLife America. Islam Siddiqui was moving between U.S. administration. I think he had some positions in the U.S. Department of Agriculture under Clinton. He was back with CropLife. And then Obama nominated him to be the chief agriculture negotiator for our trade office. And he did this right after Michelle Obama had planted the organic garden, and he was really promoting organic, healthy food, and had his garden. And then when she did that, you may remember from the news, CropLife, the very same CropLife, launched this attack on her, this letter writing campaign, criticizing her for bad-mouthing these really important technologies and making the American public fearful of pesticides and the things we produce. So CropLife is attacking Obama's wife. Then Obama goes and nominates the guy from CropLife to be our chief agricultural negotiator at the trade office. It I kind of had to wonder. I mean, I often wonder what their table conversations and their dinner table conversations are like. I don't know. But that was really a great concern. And then many of us, Pesticide Action Network and other groups, launched a big campaign with National Family Farm Coalition and others that were part of this U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance I talked about this morning to try to block this, the confirmation. So, letters to senators. We were able to get Senator Wyden from Oregon to raise some questions about possible conflict of interest in this position in his Senate hearings. And so there was beginning to be a bit of a buzz. And then Congress went on recess. And what the president can do, I found out during recess, is recess appoint everybody he or she wants to without having to go through that onerous democratic process of Senate hearing and confirmation. And so he explained, or the sort of word was, well, he had all these nominations, and many of them had been blocked by Republicans, and that was probably true. They were blocking anything Obama was doing. I guess this was 2 years, I think it was 2 years ago. So he used the recess in order to recess appoint everybody, which means just put them in. I think the next morning you wake up on Monday and it's like, oh, the guy's already in place, he's already our chief ag negotiator for the U.S. Trade Office. And there was nothing that we could do. So much more democracy. He's been there for a year. What I've heard from colleagues like Michael Hansen, who works with Phil in Kodax, the international commission around
food safety. It's a joint commission between the World Health Organization and the Food and Ag Organization. There are some seats up here in the front. There are 2 seats. And it sets international food rules. None of them are mandatory on countries, but they are voluntary. And very often, developing countries really need this guidance to help work out their own legal system.
So Siddiqui is there leading the U.S. delegation, and of course he's making sure that whatever decisions come out of this are in line with the U.S. trade agenda, which is not labeling, not restrictions on GMOs, making sure that any kind of restriction on GMO could be considered a trade barrier and so on. And so the word that we have is that in one of these important discussions, I think a U.S. delegate was beginning to go along with the majority will and the concerns of the Global South and pulled her aside and made intimations that her job security would be at risk if she didn't kind of quickly fall back in line with the U.S. Or proclivities that are happening around the world.
Don't be totally depressed, because there is lots of resistance.
Yeah, so we'll get to the good news.
So,
This on a website, so those of us who don't have.
Yeah, I should. It's just kind of hot off the Anne-Marie, our intern's press. So we haven't yet put it up, but we'll do so as soon as we can, yeah.
On your website?
Yeah, that would be our Pesticide Action Network's website, which is PANNA, PANNA.org.
So we've been going at it for about an hour, and I have some comments I want to make about the framework in which this is all being justified. But for a moment, why don't you turn to your neighbor and talk about the picture that we've been painting so far. What have you gleaned from that? Not all the details, but just take a moment just so you can... I want to change the story a little bit to talk about the why, not the why, but philanthrocapitalism. Anybody heard that term before? Philanthrocapitalism. And then before you define it, I'm going to ask you, who's heard of the Ford Foundation, Kellogg Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation? Who's heard of her, right? Okay. The Packard Foundation, right? Now, those are some of the biggest foundations in the world. There's others. What do we know about those? Where do they get their money? Ford, Kellogg, right? The big industrial giants around the 19th and 20th. What was that? Well, yeah, there's all that behind it, okay? But they're all what? From industrial corporations that made their money through, right, Robert Barron's, the Carnegie Foundation, and so on. So now, those foundations in the late part of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century get formed and to improve America, right? Now, what was the thinking that those foundations used to try to improve America? Right? Libraries and information from the Carnegie Foundation, but Ford Foundation and all these other foundations start to think about how to improve the world with the technology and the thinking that went into the industrial processes the corporations that they made their money from, right? So but from the Ford and Rockefeller foundations, we have the Green Revolution in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, using the kind of technology and thinking that went into the making of the money into trying to improve the world. So now we're going to go to the 21st century, fast forward over lots of bad history, and we have Gates Foundation and Buffett and Soros Foundation, who does good things, but was basically using manipulations of the market and information technology and intellectual property rights to make all of their money. So what kind of solutions are they providing for the world? What do you think? In the context of what? Similar kinds of things, right?
How do you own that?
How to make more money through the use of intellectual property rights. I mean, how to help people make more money, right? Improve, yeah.
Patents and residuals.
Right.
If they can make residual of every seed, then they
That's
don't.
right. That's right. Somebody's going to make money off of those things. So I'm going to make the argument that this idea of philanthropic capitalism comes out of the new law of variance, if you will. Right? The manipulation of the market through manipulation of the stock exchange, investments, and so on. So philanthropic capitalism is a term that got coined, what, 10 years ago maybe, by some folks who were financial wizards in the market. The idea is that business really knows how to make the world better. We already had that from the old days, but they thought it was a new idea, so they kind of just turned it. And Gates has picked up on this too. So the idea is to promote entrepreneurship, private ownership, because the public sector gets fit. I want to make an argument that the reason why the public sector in Africa failed was because of what the policies of World Bank, IMF, and other international agencies which are part of the impoverishment of Africa. It's not the only reason, but there's a way in which, I'll tell you two stories that may help to make the point of basketball. And the way in which the failures of governments in Africa, so-called failures of governments to provide for their people, comes directly out of the kinds of U.S. policy and foreign policy of other nations and these international monetary institutions, which led to things like in Ethiopia, which had food granaries for many centuries, since basically the dawn of history, because in that part of Africa there's a lot of instability in the environment, and so people provided for food security by having granaries, which are usually owned by kingdoms and then by the nation state. Well, in the 1970s and 1980s, when Ethiopia was going through many different kinds of trouble, this is just one country. IMF and World Bank say, particularly IMF says, if you're going to get more loans from us, you're going to have to sell off your granaries. They're gone. 15 years later, in a speech that was in Seattle, the Gates Foundation folks say, we're going to help provide for food security in Ethiopia by helping to fund privately owned granaries. Surprise, surprise. So I'm arguing that the way that the IMF and World Bank and U.S. policy, including the agricultural policies, which have been really devastating on the continent of Africa as well as other places, but creating a void or a gap in which the foundations, in particular the Gates Foundation and the other new foundations, are providing solutions which are private. They promote government-private solutions, but they're mainly privatized. So another example of that is with the destruction of agricultural extension in Uganda and some other countries in Central Africa, because there's no money to pay the agricultural universities and research institutions to provide for extension. Gates comes in and sets up private companies for the public good to provide agricultural extension information over a cell phone. So there's just a good idea in some ways, right? Because it's providing for connection between rural and people and centers of information. But the kind of information that's being projected is coming from a research and extension agenda that's not necessarily coming from the continent of Africa, but ideas that are coming from outside. So again, a void was created by the destruction of the ability of Uganda in particular, but other countries too, Tanzania, to provide for the education of its own farmers. And Gates comes in and says, we've got a solution which is going to set up private companies after this first round of research about whether it works or not, and provide extension to private sources. So there's a way in which the ideology of the thinking of the Gates Foundation, of Bill Gates in particular, is getting promoted throughout the world. It's a communication problem, you would say. As a matter of fact, whenever we have a critique of the Gates Foundation, they say, oh, you just don't understand us, you know, and trust us, basically. And there's lots of other examples where I could tell I don't want to take up a lot of time to do that because I want to get us to discussion. I'm going to check my notes for a second. I want to shift from that to talk about how the Gates Foundation is looking at research. One of the things we've been noticing is there's there's all these different pieces of the puzzle that Gates and other people are funding to promote this agenda for an information-rich, money-rich, fuel-rich kind of approach to agriculture. Fuel-rich meaning fertilizer and pesticides and so on. One of the latest pieces, this is coming from some work of Andrew Mishita with the Farmers Network in Zimbabwe that's not on the presses yet, will be on our website soon. Andrew Mishita and Carol Thompson, who's from Northern Arizona University, wrote a book on biopiracy. Been working together for the last 8 or 10 years on looking at the impacts of U.S. policy on farmers in Zimbabwe and across southern Africa, what we used to call the southern tier states. Andrew's a really busy guy, so he did a report on CGAR, which is the agricultural research centers that provide information and seed saving in Africa and around the rest of the world in different ways. There's all these various centers, and one of them in Africa is also being funded by the Gates Foundation, and he's got research that shows some of the connections between the Gates research agenda and the way CGAR is working. And that will be published on our website too.
Wait, what's working?
CGAR.
C-G-I-A-R.
Right.
One more time, C-D.
No, C-I-G-A-R.
It stands for the Consultative Group of International Agricultural Research.
Right. And these are the places which provided the seed concentration and research for the Green Revolution and beyond. And they now continue to exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so CGAR is one form of research and seed saving that's being funded a lot more by Gates. It's about 40% of its budget now, of various ones. And I can give you some more documentation, which I don't have with me. But the idea is that Gates is funding huge portions of the research agenda for conservation of seed and seed improvement, including hybrid seeds and so on.
The seed bank in Norway.
Right, and that's part of the whole piece too. So I don't want to talk about CGAR much. I'm just saying that Andrew's been working on that. And it's a really great example of how Gates is influencing the research for agriculture on the ground. I want to mention another one. So there's, again, this lock between U.S. foreign policy and our U.S. agricultural policy and so on is being played out through NEPAD. This is another acronym which stands for, somebody help me?
New economic policies for
African development.
Right, and some of you may know a lot more about it than I do. But it's a larger scale process to impact all aspects of African development, economic development. Within that, there is the comprehensive approach to Africa, CPAD, Africa Agricultural Development. Okay, and that's what I want to talk about. So NEPAD has CPOD, okay? And that's the agricultural research arm. And Andrew's been doing analysis of the documents and that the CPAD has been presenting on the website. And and CPAD is for the whole continent of Africa. There's arrangements between each of the governments and the U.S. government that are being signed around how CPAD is going to operate in the country. So it's according to Andrew now, there's 4 pillars, and I'm going to just talk about 2 of them. One is about a research agenda, and the other is about seed improvement, which is basically the same thing. Except the seed improvement is also about creation of private companies throughout the continent to substitute for the already existing seed companies, seed production companies that exist. It's kind of this weird thing. Why, you might ask, they're doing that. The idea, again, is I think to rationalize the way it's coming out. So if there's a centralized approach to how seed development and distribution is happening through the continent, that's being rolled out through this CPAD. I'm not going to talk about too many details, partially because Andrew's asked me not to until the report is given out. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be a bait and switch here. I'll give you what I can. And partially because the details aren't as important to me as the picture or as the story that's being told. Does that make sense? So anyway, if it doesn't, I'll take your criticism. Oops. So let me step back. The analysis that Carol and Andrew are overall saying is that CPAD has got two basic functions. One is to, as I was saying, make it so that the same kind of research, types of research and development, and the same kinds of agricultural seed distribution companies are happening throughout the continent. They look the same, so it's easier to cookie cut, if you will. The second is it's about stealing seed, and that's where it comes back to this conference. Over the years, Andrew and Carol have been trying to point out to us on this continent that this is really about biopiracy, just like Melinda has been telling us for many, many years, that the U.S. and Europe, developed Asia, are really looking for all the seeds, all the intellectual property that's contained in our cultural heritage around the world. So it's about theft of the seed, not through like stealing the seed immediately and pirating it away, as it were, but through creating these so-called free access places like CGAR or other places where the seed is collected for the common good. But who has access to those seeds? Who has the information about where those seeds are? Who gets to take those seeds and then do research and development and patent them? Are the corporations and the institutions that are associated with the corporations in the West. So even though it looks like it's free access, it really isn't, because you have to have the tools and the time and the money to take from this common good that's been locally generated and conserved over many, many generations. And now it's up in the global market, effectively, the global information market, available to anybody freely and fairly, but who has the tools, the time, and the resources to develop it are those who have power. So there's a way of extracting from the commons, putting it up into the world in pretense of fair and free access, without giving any credit or resources back to those people who conserved the seed and developed that seed for many, many generations. So that's the story I want to tell you without getting into the details. Does that story make sense from where? Okay. So, and that doesn't matter whether it's GMO or hybrid. One part of our struggle here is to recognize that GMOs is one big piece of the puzzle, but the so-called conventional technologies of creating hybrid wheat, sorghum, and so on, are also patentable and are also subject to the same kinds of taking that the GMO technology is really good at. So we have to look at it more than just as GMOs, and that's one of the contributions that Andrew and Carol are making to the conversation. So CPAD is a top-down approach, as I said, looking at how do you create similar institutions in each of the countries with some concession to local conditions, and focusing on food security through high technology inputs and through a research and development agenda that's coming from the United States perspective. See, I'm just telling you to look out for it. There's a really great website, the CPAD.org. They're pretty transparent in what they're doing. We'll have more detailed analysis in the next 3 or 4 weeks. That'll be on our website. The last thing I want to say about this, and then let's get to some questions and conversation. It's not just the United States that Gates is working in terms of this, and colleagues of Phil's are doing a report on the impact of Gates Foundation on the agricultural research and development in the UK for Africa. So the DFID, which I can't remember what it stands for, that's another acronym. Do you know, Martha?
Sorry?
Yeah, Department for International Development is working with Gates. They signed a memorandum in February 2010 to gather agricultural research to support efforts to put technology in the hands of farmers in Africa, in particular. Okay, it's like a huge chunk of money, many millions. I think 17 million going to that project. Of that money, and this is now I'm going to jump in this report, You're looking now at all of Gates's money that he's put into, or the foundation's put into research for agriculture in Africa. $517 million overall, okay, for the whole world, not just for the UK. 40% of that's for GMO-related research. Okay. Now, in that report, they say, and this is the Gates Foundation report that is being quoted here, that the soil is one of the key factors in promoting positive agriculture. 4% of research money from the Gates Foundation is going to soil research. So 40% for seed improvement, in quotes, through transgenics, that's the term they use, and 4% for soil research. So this is, Gates is trying to, I want to go back to where I started. Gates Foundation is trying to impact the way that research and development is happening and the way that aid is happening throughout the world for Africa. Whether it's the United States, Europe, the UK, and I don't know enough about China and Japan to know that. We'd like to know. So when we ask who's bopping the world, to go back to what Bill was talking about, it's these same corporations and the foundations that were founded out of the corporate money that is really whacking us in the head. So that's a pretty bad joke again. But I wanted to suggest that we do have colleagues in Africa and all around the world who are in resistance to that. Marcia, you might mention a couple, and then let's take some comments about what you know about what's happening in the continent of Africa and where you think resistance can happen. Because it is a lot. So we each can make a couple quick sentences.
I won't take much time.
Yeah, I want us to get this.
Yeah, I mean, there are African groups. There's the African Alliance for Food Sovereignty, which has a number of networks that are itself members, PALUM, ROPA, and they are organizing around resisting the Gates push of GMOs into Africa. And they're asking that we, on the other side, the belly of the beast, that we do our part to try to turn the tap. In the case of USAID, it would be to have the citizen campaign demanding that our taxpayer dollars don't go towards these kinds of things. Right now, the political climate is very tough to try to push this campaign agenda within USAID, because to do that effectively, we would need some strong congressional support and senators or representatives willing to stand up and question this paradigm. But as I discussed earlier, so much of where the Congress is going right now is in this line. And even though there are a few senators who would be friendly, John Kester, organic farmer, and so on, but they are under so much pressure and there's so much on the defensive that they have to pick their battles really strategically. So we're finding it very hard to move much against USAID right now, although part of what we're doing is just trying to expose it. And last year we were actually, to our surprise, surprisingly effective in blocking some language in the Global Food Security Act, which was an act that was being pushed by a couple of senators here, directing where U.S. International development monies should go. And so it talked about all the big, wonderful, general things, and then when it got to the specifics, the one example they gave was for research into agricultural biotechnologies, including genetically engineered seeds. But they went all the way down to very specifically say that and mention nothing about agroecology or plant breeding or conventional or soil management or anything else. So there was a big campaign in the U.S. with faith-based groups, with this U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, to both from the outside, putting op-eds in the paper. I have a copy of an op-ed that I wrote downstairs called "GMOs Won't Feed the World," and so that's the context. We were trying to block this language and to replace it with agroecology. Well, at the end of the day, and a very, the positive, very exciting thing was that we're kind of on the outside doing the critique, putting stuff out in the media, and some of our partners in the faith-based community were kind of going on, on the inside and bringing our critique and sitting down with what's his name, Senator Lugard, who's really pro-biotech. And they were, together with this sort of inside-outside tactic, we were able to change that language so that it no longer said USAID research shall go towards biotech, but softened it to that it could go to a range of approaches, including agroecology. We got that in there as the first in the list, and then it went on to listing conventional breeding and GE. We weren't able to totally eliminate GE, but that's sort of the situation where we're in. that Food Security Act has then got stalled for various unrelated reasons, and the expectation is that Senator Lugar will bring it back this year in some other form. Although kind of right now with the budget, everything's sort of off, and so bringing up proposals for new money is unlikely, which we feel is actually a good thing. This act, just to mention briefly, did cause a fair bit of dissension within the kind of development, environmental, hunger, civil society community. There are a number of the big development hunger NGOs, CARE, Save the Children, Oxfam, that were feeling like, we just want to get the money passed. We have had so little money for international development. Stop worrying about the details, let's just get this signed off on, and then we can worry about how it's used. And the rest of us were saying, no, we can't just say, get the money where it says it'll go to GE, because we know where it's going, and that's going to undermine everything that you and we care about. We weren't really able to quite win that discussion. It's still a discussion, I think, within the development, hunger, civil society community we need to have. But so that was just one example where we were able to do some organizing. And then there's the other campaign strategy, like how do we get at Gates, and maybe Phil would have some ideas. Because although they're not U.S. taxpayer monies and they're private, in a sense it's hard because they're more secretive and they don't have to respond. But from what I hear, they're more sensitive to the public shame strategy.
So, do you want to say something?
Well, let me just make 2 points. I really want us to get to questions. One of the biggest, from my point of view, forms of resistance have been the reports issued by the UN Special Rapporteur for Hunger, and one of his reports was included in the list that Marcia has there, so everything. When you get someone with that esteem and in that position, when you get the IASTD report, which is also funded by the World Bank, which I think is one needs to always emphasize in their face, pushing agroecology and so forth. That's on the macro level, really forces of resistance. I want to assure you that in almost every African country where I've ever had any connections or activity, there are lots of groups trying to do things. The problems have to do with the enormous disparity in resources. The problems have to do with other issues endemic to Africa, that the boundaries are artificial, that very often dependent upon European colonial kinds of things rather than any kinds of issues of organic, communities and things like that. Stuff that I'm sure most of you know about. But even in tiny Burkina Faso, there is a group called We Are the Future, Women, We Are the Solution, women-led, and so forth. Now, Gates, about 2 years ago, had a major conference of NGOs, which they picked, and they were all the NGOs that they picked who were quoting all of this. The effect and the impact is now they're having a new conference, and they've had to invite a few of these groups, such as the one in Burkina Faso and so forth. Now, all of a sudden, after never giving any grants to any kinds of cooperative groups, sustainable ag groups and so forth, believe it or not, a tiny proportion, a tiny number, are beginning to go to those groups, which of course they're using as a fig leaf. Again, we shouldn't be pacified by these kinds of things. But it's not that they can ignore, with all their power. We're amazed, the group of us in Seattle, our tiny little group with hardly any resources, that we're able to work with Africans, work with people like Marcia and so forth, and actually see some little changes. And when all you get mobilized and others get mobilized, hopefully we'll see big changes.
Yeah, we're going to be holding a conference next year. All of us are involved in it on agroecological alternatives to a Gates model, if you will. That's not the title of the conference, but that's what it's going to be about. And we have some of our African partners already signed on, as well as some of the other groups that have been working on this issue are considering that. Some of our friends who aren't at the table right now are involved. And we're really looking to provide a place for the conversation to unfold. And it's not just about agriculture. It's also about public education and public health, global public health as well as local. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with the Gates Foundation in these areas too for their arrogance. And I'm not going to talk about that now, but just know that we're one part of a whole array of folks who are saying, let's stop this concentrated power that's in the hands of the Gates Foundation and from just rolling out over all these sectors and imposing their solutions. So with that, we welcome your participation in the conference, and raise your hands if you have a question. I just want to see how many people. There's a couple. Okay, so let's start, and we'll start in the back and then move forward. And stand up if you could so we can hear you.
Hi, my name is Brandon Brooks. I'm actually visiting from Boston and representing a couple of organizations that do urban agriculture and work with community food systems there. I guess one of my questions has to do with this huge resource disparity that we're seeing from the forces that are pushing GMOs and other kinds of agricultural technology and the forces that are acting against that. And I'm wondering what the forces on the other side have a very integrated strategy reaching across a wide variety of levels to really insert themselves into positions of power in these discussions. And I'm wondering what the strategies are in this movement to insert our voices in those places. Not just through protest, which I believe is one of the ways, but actually having many more of the seats at the table where these decisions are being made. And I don't know if we have the same integrated approach to that in this movement.
Well, there are many different venues and many different groups that are involved in different aspects of this movement. So, for instance, a number of groups were involved in international context in helping to get drafted a fairly strong protocol, the Cartagena Protocol, Biosafety Protocol. This was over extraordinary opposition by the U.S., Canada, Australia, etc., etc. People should not think that we don't have some successes. And then a supplementary protocol, which took 7 years of negotiation, unbelievably tense, to establish an international regime for liability for damages, all of which recognizes that GMOs can cause damage. Okay, this is no longer, they treat it as if it's hypothetical. First of all, damages have hundreds of instances have been documented. Millions and billions of dollars have been paid out by, for example, Bayer with unapproved GM rice that has been contaminating crops in Arkansas and so forth. They've paid out millions and millions of dollars. So the fact is that we won this labeling victory in the Codex Alimentarius and so forth. Different projects around the world have been stopped by citizen activists, ranging from destruction of crops in the field to action pressuring governments, especially in smaller countries where there's this incredible symbiosis between people in NGOs and people in government because they went to school together and all of this kind of stuff. So there are many fronts and many struggles on many fronts, I would say.
I'll just mention a couple of things besides the work being done internationally in those fora. One other thing that's happening internationally is there's a Committee for Food Security, which is a revisioning and a recreation of something that existed years ago through the FAO, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. It had kind of fallen apart, and then it was reformulated and given new energy and life through a really civil society-led process, in which the civil society members said, all right, we're not content just to be invited, to come to these, UN events, and there's sort of a UN protocol where it's like the governments all speak first, and then at the back of the room, at the end of the line, then they make room for a couple of civil society comments. But so it was in part learning from the ISTAT process, in which civil society had a place at the table, and we're authors, and we're on the governing committee, and had in the plenaries with the government we had negotiated the ability to speak. It was a huge battle. We negotiated the ability to speak in real time, like, as soon as the U.S. delegate could say something, we could raise our hands and counter it. And that was as strange as it might seem that it was radical. It was radical, and that has kind of created some new standards. So this Committee for Food Security was civil society groups coming back and saying, all right, let's revitalize this. But it's not just going to be, everybody there and then 2 or 3 civil society people that are completely outnumbered. But we're going to have representation from all the regions. We're going to have farmers and fishers and consumers and environmentalists and so on. So that has become a really strong force that is negotiating and discussing these issues in the international community. But then locally, I just want to bring it back into the U.S. We've often, like at Pesticide Action Network, we've thought, we have this kind of campaign area where we're looking at these global issues of GMOs are not the solution. But it's not really top of mind, or for most average person walking down the street. Most people are consumed with trying to be able to afford health care, or get food on the table, or worrying about their kids' education or jobs, or things that affect our lives here. Maybe there's an increasing movement around concern about GMOs, but it's still pretty localized, like around the U.S., like, GMOs in our food, is that going to make me sick? Or GMOs, I don't like what's happening. Maybe, at the outer edges of that to family farmers. But to get from there to the discussion of GMOs in the rest of the world is a big leap, and we found it challenging to really organize effectively around something that seems kind of theoretical and far away. One of the lessons we learned out of that, the battle around the Global Food Security Act, was that there are members of the faith-based community that are ready to talk, that are talking about issues, like it's part of their daily kitchen table talk, is things like feeding the world and climate change and things that environmentalists and other activists are talking about. Well, the faith community is also talking about this, sometimes going kind of down the charity line of like, oh, we've got to give food to food banks so that we can feed the poor here and ship money or food overseas, or kind of buying into the food aid. But there's an increasing number that are questioning that, and so we're looking at ways to build those conversations. And what I've found in having some of those is that some of those organizations